Viking survival hacks for freezing nights. The wind cuts through the darkness like a frozen blade, rattling the wooden walls of your shelter with a violence that makes your bones ache. Outside, the temperature has plummeted to depths that would kill an unprepared soul within hours. No electric heaters hum reassuringly in the corner. No thermostats click on to chase away the deadly cold. No emergency services wait just a phone call away. This is the reality that faced the Vikings for centuries. Brutal, unforgiving winters that tested the limits of human endurance. Yet somehow, these remarkable people not only survived, but thrived in conditions that would send modern humans scrambling for the nearest heated building. They carved out a living in Iceland's volcanic wilderness, established settlements in Greenland's ice-locked fjords, and even ventured as far as North America, all while facing winters that could freeze the breath in your lungs. But here's what makes their story truly extraordinary. They did it all without a single piece of modern technology. No synthetic insulation, no petroleum-based heating systems, no freeze-dried emergency rations, just raw human ingenuity, hard-won wisdom passed down through generations, and an iron determination to survive whatever nature threw at them. The Vikings weren't just warriors wielding axes and raiding monasteries, though they certainly did that too. They were farmers, fishermen, craftsmen, and explorers who had to master the art of survival in one of the world's most challenging environments. Every technique they developed was battle-tested against nature's fury, refined through countless harsh winters, and proven effective by the simple fact that they lived to see another spring. What's remarkable is how many of their survival strategies still work today. In fact, some of the most effective cold weather survival techniques used by modern off-grid enthusiasts, Arctic explorers, and emergency preparedness experts trace their roots directly back to Viking innovation. These weren't just primitive people making do with crude methods. They were master survivors who developed sophisticated, time-tested solutions to problems that still challenge us today. In this comprehensive guide, we'll explore 10 of the most effective Viking survival hacks that kept families alive through the darkest, coldest nights of the medieval period. These aren't just historical curiosities. They're practical, proven techniques that could save your life in a modern emergency. Whether you're an off-grid homesteader, a prepper building your emergency skills, or simply someone who wants to understand how humans survived before the safety net of modern technology, these ancient wisdom gems will open your eyes to possibilities you never imagined. 1. The Fortress of Earth. Turf-covered longhouses. When winter descended upon the Viking settlements like a conquering army, the first line of defense wasn't steel or stone. It was earth itself. The Vikings understood something that many modern builders have forgotten. The ground beneath your feet holds incredible insulating power, and learning to harness it could mean the difference between life and death. Viking longhouses, particularly in the harsh climates of Iceland and Greenland, were architectural marvels disguised as simple earthen mounds. These weren't crude hovels thrown together in desperation. They were sophisticated structures that represented centuries of accumulated knowledge about surviving extreme cold. The basic concept was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of fighting the cold, they buried themselves in the Earth's natural insulation. The construction process began with a foundation of stone or timber, providing structural integrity and preventing the dwelling from sinking into the ground. But the real magic happened in the walls. Layer by layer, the Vikings would build up thick barriers of turf. Not just any turf, but carefully selected combinations of soil, moss, and grass that created a living insulation system. These walls weren't thin veneers. They could be up to 3 feet thick, creating a thermal barrier that modern synthetic insulation struggles to match. The science behind this technique is fascinating. Earth is an excellent thermal mass, meaning it absorbs heat slowly and releases it slowly during the day. When fires were burning and people were active, the turf walls would gradually absorb warmth. At night, when temperatures plummeted, they would slowly release that stored heat back into the living space. This created a remarkably stable internal temperature, even when the outside world was gripped by deadly cold. But the Vikings took this concept even further. They understood that insulation alone wasn't enough. They needed to create a complete thermal envelope. The roofs were also covered with thick layers of turf, creating a living ceiling that provided additional insulation, while also being naturally waterproof. Some of these turf roofs were so thick and stable that grass and even small trees would grow on them, creating what we might recognize today as the world's first green roofs. Inside these earth-sheltered homes, the Vikings employed another crucial survival strategy. They shared their living space with their livestock. This wasn't just about convenience, it was about survival. Cows, horses, sheep, and goats generate significant body heat. And by housing them in the same structure, Viking families could tap into this additional heat source. The animals were typically kept in a separate section of the longhouse, but the shared walls allowed their body heat to contribute to the overall warmth of the dwelling. The layout of these longhouses was also carefully planned for maximum heat efficiency. The central hearth was positioned to distribute warmth throughout the space, and sleeping areas were arranged to take advantage of rising warm air. Storage areas for food and supplies were placed in the cooler sections of the house, creating natural refrigeration that helped preserve provisions through the long winter months. Modern science has validated what the Vikings knew: instinctively earth-sheltered construction is one of the most energy-efficient building methods available. Today, eco-builders and off-grid enthusiasts are rediscovering these ancient techniques, using them to create homes that require minimal external heating even in harsh climates. The principles haven't changed. Thick earth walls, thermal mass, and strategic positioning still create comfortable living spaces that can withstand extreme cold. For modern survivalists and preppers, the lessons from Viking longhouses are invaluable. In a long-term emergency situation where conventional heating might not be available, understanding how to create earth-sheltered spaces could be life-saving. Even simple applications of these principles, like banking earth against the walls of an existing structure or creating a partially underground shelter, can dramatically improve a building's ability to retain heat. The Vikings proved that you don't need high-tech solutions to survive in extreme conditions. Sometimes the most effective answers are literally right under your feet, waiting to be shaped by human ingenuity and determination. Their turf-covered longhouses weren't just homes, they were fortresses against the cold, built with materials that cost nothing but provided protection that money couldn't buy. 2. The art of layering. Viking wool mastery. In the frozen landscape of medieval Scandinavia, clothing wasn't fashion. It was armor against death. The Vikings developed what might be the most sophisticated layering system in human history, a complex understanding of how to trap warmth close to the body while maintaining mobility and comfort. This wasn't casual experimentation. It was a life-or-death science refined over generations of harsh winters. The foundation of Viking cold-weather clothing was wool, but not just any wool. These master survivalists understood the different properties of wool from various animals and how to process it for maximum effectiveness. Sheep wool formed the backbone of their clothing system, but they also utilized wool from goats and even collected the soft undercoat of wild animals, like musk oxen, when available. Each type of wool had its place in the layering system, chosen for specific properties that contributed to overall warmth and survival. The first layer against the skin was perhaps the most crucial. Vikings wore a thin, closely woven wool tunic that served as their base layer. This wasn't the scratchy, uncomfortable wool that many people associate with medieval clothing. Viking women had mastered the art of spinning and weaving wool into fabrics that were surprisingly soft and comfortable against the skin. They understood that the base layer needed to wick moisture away from the body while providing a foundation of warmth that wouldn't be easily displaced by movement. This base layer tunic was carefully constructed to fit snugly without being restrictive. The Vikings knew that loose clothing would allow cold air to circulate against the skin, defeating the purpose of the layer. The weave was tight enough to trap air, which is what actually provides insulation, but loose enough to allow moisture vapor to escape. This prevented the deadly accumulation of sweat that could freeze against the skin in extreme cold. Over this base layer came the second tunic, typically made from thicker, more loosely woven wool. This middle layer was designed to trap air between the fibers while providing additional warmth. The Vikings often used different wool weights and weaves for different parts of the garment, making the torso section thicker than the arms to prioritize core warmth while maintaining arm mobility. This showed their sophisticated understanding of human physiology and how the body loses heat. The outer layer was where Viking clothing technology truly shined. For extreme cold, they employed thick wool cloaks or fur-lined outer garments that could be adjusted based on conditions. These weren't simple blankets thrown over the shoulders. They were carefully engineered garments with strategic closures, adjustable openings, and reinforced areas that received the most wear. The cloaks were often fastened with elaborate brooches that weren't just decorative. They were precision instruments that allowed the wearer to adjust ventilation and coverage as needed. Viking leg protection was equally sophisticated. They wore wool leggings that were tied with strips of leather or cord to ensure a snug fit without cutting off circulation. These leggings were often reinforced at the knees and ankles, areas that received the most stress and wear. The tying system allowed for adjustment as the wool stretched or as conditions changed, ensuring that the protection remained effective throughout long, harsh winters. Footwear was another area where Viking textile mastery showed. They understood that feet were particularly vulnerable to cold injury, so they developed a system of wool socks and foot wrappings that could be layered inside leather boots. These wool foot coverings were often made from the finest, softest wool available, as the Vikings knew that any roughness or uncomfortable seams could lead to blisters and sores that could become infected in the harsh winter environment. The most remarkable aspect of Viking wool clothing was its performance when wet. Unlike many modern synthetic materials, wool retains much of its insulating properties even when soaked. The Vikings took advantage of this by treating their wool garments with natural oils and fats that helped repel water while maintaining breathability. This treatment process was a closely guarded skill, with different families and regions developing their own recipes for wool conditioning that could mean the difference between life and death in wet, cold conditions. Color also played a role in Viking cold-weather clothing, though not in the way you might expect. While bright colors were certainly used for ceremonial and social purposes, the Vikings understood that dark colors absorbed more heat from the sun during the brief winter days. They often used natural dyes to create darker outer garments, while keeping lighter colors for inner layers where heat absorption wasn't as critical. The Vikings also developed ingenious methods for maintaining and repairing their wool clothing during the long winter months. They created portable repair kits with needles, thread, and patches that could be used to fix damage before it compromised the garment's effectiveness. This wasn't just about making do with what they had. It was about maintaining life-saving equipment in conditions where replacement wasn't possible. Modern outdoor enthusiasts and survival experts have rediscovered many of these Viking techniques. The principle of layering different wool weights and weaves is still considered one of the most effective cold-weather clothing strategies available. Military forces operating in extreme cold environments use layering systems that would be recognizable to a Viking warrior, proving that some survival technologies are truly timeless. For modern preppers and survivalists, understanding Viking wool techniques offers valuable insights into cold-weather survival without dependence on modern synthetic materials. In a long-term emergency situation, the ability to process and use wool effectively could be the difference between comfort and hypothermia. The Vikings proved that with knowledge, skill, and the right materials, humans can not only survive but remain active and capable in conditions that would otherwise be lethal. 3. The living heat bank. Stone-packed hearths. Fire is life when winter's grip tightens around your shelter, but fire is also fleeting. The Vikings understood this fundamental truth and developed one of the most ingenious heat storage systems in human history. Their solution wasn't to burn more fuel, it was to make the heat last longer, capturing and storing the thermal energy of their fires in a way that could warm them through the darkest hours of the night. The central hearth of a Viking longhouse was far more than a simple fire pit. It was a sophisticated thermal battery, carefully engineered to capture, store, and slowly release heat over many hours. The basic principle was elegant: surround the fire with stones that would absorb heat during the burning hours. Then continue radiating that warmth long after the flames died down. But the Vikings took this concept to extraordinary levels of refinement. The stone selection process was crucial and required knowledge that was passed down through generations. Not all stones were suitable for this purpose. Some would crack or even explode when heated, potentially causing injury or damaging the carefully constructed hearth. The Vikings preferred specific types of stone that could withstand repeated heating and cooling cycles without deteriorating. Granite, schist, and certain types of sandstone were favored for their thermal properties and durability. The stones weren't just randomly placed around the fire. Viking hearth builders created sophisticated arrangements that maximized heat capture and distribution. Flat stones were often used to create a base platform that would heat evenly and provide a stable surface for cooking. Around this base, they arranged larger stones in patterns that would create air channels, allowing hot air to circulate and ensuring that all surfaces of the stones were exposed to the fire's heat. The size and arrangement of the stones was also carefully calculated. Smaller stones would heat up quickly but also cool down quickly, while larger stones took longer to heat but stored more thermal energy and released it more slowly. By combining different sizes and arranging them strategically, the Vikings created a heat storage system that could provide warmth for many hours after the fire was allowed to die down. During the evening hours, when the family was active and awake, they would maintain a good fire that would heat the stones until they were almost glowing. This wasn't just random fire tending. It was a precise process that required understanding how long it took different stones to reach optimal heat storage temperature. Too little heating and the stones wouldn't store enough energy. Too much and fuel would be wasted without additional benefit. As bedtime approached, the fire would be carefully banked or allowed to die down to embers. But the real heat source for the night was now the stones themselves. These thermal batteries would continue radiating warmth for hours, providing enough heat to keep the sleeping family comfortable without the need to tend a fire through the night. This was crucial for survival. Tending a fire all night required someone to stay awake, depleting the family's energy reserves and increasing fuel consumption. The Vikings developed several techniques for directing and concentrating this stored heat where it was needed most. Some families would remove heated stones from the hearth and place them in metal or ceramic containers that could be moved to sleeping areas. These portable heat sources were the medieval equivalent of electric blankets, providing targeted warmth where it was most needed. Another technique involved creating stone-lined channels, or ducts that would direct warm air from the hearth to specific areas of the longhouse. These primitive heating systems could warm sleeping areas, food storage areas, or workspaces, allowing the family to make the most of their stored heat. The Vikings understood air circulation and how to direct heated airflow in ways that wouldn't be out of place in modern HVAC design. For families with limited fuel resources, which was common in treeless regions like Iceland, the stone hearth system was absolutely essential. It allowed them to extract maximum heat from every piece of precious firewood or dried animal dung that they burned. The efficiency of their system meant that a relatively small amount of fuel could provide warmth for an entire night, stretching limited resources through the long winter months. The Vikings also developed techniques for safely handling and moving hot stones. They created specialized tools, essentially primitive tongs made from metal or antler, that allowed them to move heated stones without risking burns. They understood that while the stones were valuable heat sources, they were also dangerous and required careful handling. The thermal mass principle that the Vikings mastered is still used today in modern masonry heaters and thermal mass heating systems. Contemporary eco-builders and off-grid enthusiasts use updated versions of Viking techniques, incorporating stones, bricks, or other thermal mass materials into their heating systems to store and slowly release heat. The principle hasn't changed. Capture heat when it's available. Store it in dense materials, and let it radiate out slowly over time. For modern survivalists and preppers, understanding thermal mass heating could be life-saving in emergency situations. The ability to create a heat storage system using nothing but stones and fire knowledge could provide warmth and comfort when conventional heating systems fail. The Vikings proved that with the right knowledge and techniques, you can stretch limited fuel resources to provide heat for extended periods, making the difference between survival and hypothermia. The stone-packed hearth system also demonstrates the Vikings' deep understanding of physics and thermodynamics. Even without formal scientific education, they intuitively grasped concepts like thermal mass, heat capacity, and heat transfer that modern engineers study in universities. This practical knowledge, developed through generations of trial and error, created heating systems that were both effective and efficient, proving that innovation often comes from necessity and observation rather than formal education. 4. The medieval pantry, Sealed clay pot preservation. When the last fishing boat returned from the sea before winter's ice locked the harbors, and the final hunting party brought back their quarry before the snow made tracking impossible, the Vikings faced a grim reality. They had gathered all the fresh food they would see for months. Everything they had harvested, hunted, or caught had to last through the long, dark winter, and failure to preserve it properly meant starvation long before spring's return. The Vikings developed food preservation techniques that were nothing short of revolutionary, and among their most ingenious innovations was the sealed clay pot system. This wasn't simply storing food in containers. It was a sophisticated preservation method that could keep cooked meals, preserved meats, and other essential nutrients fresh for months without refrigeration, extending the useful life of their food stores far beyond what natural preservation alone could achieve. The process began with the creation of specialized clay vessels, crafted specifically for long-term food storage. These weren't ordinary pottery pieces. They were precision instruments designed for survival. Viking potters understood that the clay composition, wall thickness, and firing temperature all affected the vessel's ability to create an airtight seal and resist cracking under thermal stress. The pots were typically wide-mouthed for easy filling and had smooth, even rims that would accept tight-fitting lids. The food preparation phase was just as crucial as the container itself. The Vikings would cook stews, roasts, and other meals that were designed specifically for preservation. These weren't just random leftovers thrown into pots. They were carefully planned preservation meals that would maintain their nutritional value and safety over extended periods. The cooking process often included ingredients that had natural preservative properties, such as salt, herbs, and acidic elements that would inhibit bacterial growth. Once the food was cooked and still hot, it would be packed into the clay vessels while maintaining sterile conditions as much as possible. The Vikings understood, even without knowledge of bacteria, that cleanliness was essential for successful preservation. They would often heat the empty pots before filling them, creating a sterile environment that would help prevent spoilage. The sealing process was where Viking ingenuity truly shined. After the food was packed into the pot, they would cover it with a layer of rendered animal fat or beeswax, creating an airtight seal that prevented oxygen from reaching the food. This wasn't a simple process. The fat had to be heated to the right temperature and applied in a specific way to ensure complete coverage and proper adhesion to the pot's rim. Too hot, and it would damage the food. Too cool, and it wouldn't create an effective seal. The sealed pots were then stored in carefully chosen locations that would remain cool and stable throughout the winter. Some were buried in the ground below the frost line, taking advantage of the Earth's natural insulation to maintain consistent temperatures. Others were placed in specially constructed cold cellars or storage buildings that were designed to stay cool without freezing. The Vikings understood that temperature stability was just as important as cool temperatures for successful preservation. The fat seal served multiple purposes, beyond just creating an airtight barrier. It also provided additional nutrition when the pot was opened, as the fat itself was a valuable source of calories during the energy-demanding winter months. When it was time to access the preserved food, the hardened fat seal would be carefully removed, often to be used in cooking or consumed directly for its high energy content. Different types of food required different preservation approaches within the clay pot system. Meats were often cooked in their own fat, creating a confit-like preservation that could last for months. Vegetables were sometimes preserved in acidic solutions or fermented preparations that would not only preserve them, but also provide essential vitamins that were otherwise difficult to obtain during winter months. The Vikings developed specific recipes and techniques for different types of food, each optimized for long-term storage and nutritional preservation. The opening process was just as important as the sealing. Vikings developed techniques for testing whether preserved food was still safe to eat, using their senses to detect any signs of spoilage. They understood that the seal itself was an indicator. If it remained intact and showed no signs of compromise, the food inside was likely still good. If the seal was broken or damaged, the contents would be carefully examined before consumption. This preservation system was particularly valuable for families and communities that might be isolated for months at a time. In remote settlements where hunting and fishing opportunities were limited during winter, these preserved food stores could mean the difference between survival and starvation. The ability to preserve cooked meals also meant that families could prepare food when fuel was available and eat it later when fuel was scarce. The Vikings also used variations of this technique for preserving other essential supplies, medicinal herbs, seeds for planting, and even some tools were stored in sealed clay vessels to protect them from moisture and pests during the long winter months. This shows their understanding that preservation wasn't just about food. It was about maintaining all the resources necessary for survival and eventual recovery. Modern preppers and survivalists have adapted these ancient techniques using updated materials and methods. Glass canning jars, vacuum sealing, and other modern preservation methods follow the same basic principles that the Vikings discovered through necessity and experimentation. The goal remains the same: create an environment where food can be stored safely for extended periods without spoilage. For contemporary off-grid enthusiasts and emergency preparedness practitioners, understanding these traditional preservation methods provides valuable backup options when modern preservation techniques aren't available. The ability to create effective food storage using basic materials like clay pots and animal fat could be crucial in long-term emergency situations where conventional preservation methods fail. The Viking clay pot preservation system demonstrates their sophisticated understanding of food science, even without formal scientific knowledge. They grasped concepts like anaerobic preservation, temperature control, and contamination prevention that form the basis of modern food preservation technology. Their methods were proven effective through centuries of use, feeding families and communities through countless harsh winters when failure meant death. 5. The watch system, sleeping in shifts for survival. In the deadly arithmetic of winter survival, every calorie burned staying warm was precious, and every hour of sleep lost to cold meant diminished strength for the challenges ahead. The Vikings understood that individual survival often depended on group cooperation, and they developed one of the most effective team-based cold-weather survival strategies ever devised: the systematic sharing of nighttime duties that kept everyone alive while conserving energy and resources. The foundation of this system was the recognition that fire was the difference between life and death during the coldest nights. But maintaining fire required constant attention. A fire left unattended for too long would die down to embers and eventually go out completely, leaving the family vulnerable to deadly cold. Yet, having one person stay awake all night to tend the fire would exhaust that individual, reducing their ability to contribute to the family's survival efforts during the demanding daylight hours. The Vikings' solution was elegantly simple, yet remarkably effective. They divided the night into shifts, with different family members taking responsibility for maintaining the fire, monitoring the shelter, and watching for dangers during specific time periods. This wasn't a casual arrangement. It was a carefully orchestrated survival system that required planning, coordination, and absolute reliability from every participant. The shift system typically began as the family prepared for sleep. The evening fire would be built up to create a good bed of coals, and the person taking the first watch would ensure that adequate fuel was available for the night ahead. This first shift was often taken by the family's most experienced fire tender, as the transition from active fire to overnight maintenance required skilled judgment about coal bed management and fuel consumption rates. Each shift typically lasted 2 to 3 hours, depending on the size of the family and the severity of the weather. During extremely cold nights, shifts might be shorter to ensure that no one person became too exhausted from staying awake in the cold. The person on duty had several responsibilities beyond just feeding the fire. They monitored the shelter for problems like snow accumulation that might damage the structure, listened for sounds that might indicate threats from wild animals or human raiders, and watched for signs that family members might be in distress from cold or illness. The fire tending itself was a skilled operation that required understanding how different types of fuel burned and how to maintain steady heat output without wasting precious resources. The night watchman had to judge when to add fuel, how much to add, and what type of fuel would provide the best heat output for the current conditions. Too much fuel would create excessive heat and waste resources. Too little would allow the fire to die down to dangerous levels. Communication between shifts was crucial for the system's effectiveness. The outgoing watchman would brief the incoming person on the current state of the fire, any problems that had developed during their shift, and any observations about weather conditions or other factors that might affect the family's safety. This information transfer ensured continuity of care and allowed each person to build on the observations of the previous shift. Children played an important role in the watch system, though their responsibilities were carefully matched to their capabilities. Young children might be responsible for very short shifts during the less critical middle portions of the night, giving them experience with fire management, while ensuring that adults handled the most challenging periods. This served as practical education, teaching survival skills that would be essential when they established their own families. The psychological benefits of the watch system were as important as the practical ones. Knowing that someone was always alert and watching provided reassurance that allowed family members to sleep more soundly during their off-duty hours. This better sleep quality meant that everyone was more rested and better able to handle the physical and mental demands of winter survival. During particularly harsh storms or extremely cold periods, the watch system might be modified to include multiple people on duty simultaneously. This provided redundancy in case one person became too cold or drowsy to maintain proper vigilance, and it allowed for more complex tasks like snow removal or emergency repairs that required more than one person to complete safely. The Vikings also developed signals and communication methods that allowed the night watch to alert sleeping family members if immediate help was needed. These might include specific sounds, physical signals, or predetermined codes that would wake the necessary people without disturbing those who didn't need to be involved in addressing the situation. Record-keeping was another aspect of the watch system that demonstrated Viking organizational skills. Families often maintained informal logs of which shifts had been most challenging, what problems had occurred during specific time periods, and how much fuel had been consumed during different weather conditions. This information helped them refine their watch schedules and resource allocation for future nights. The watch system also served as a training ground for leadership and responsibility. Taking a night watch shift required maturity, reliability, and sound judgment, qualities that were essential for survival in the harsh Viking environment. Young adults who proved themselves capable and trustworthy during night watches earned respect and were given greater responsibilities in other aspects of family and community survival. Modern applications of the Viking watch system can be found in contemporary survival situations, military operations, and emergency response scenarios. Hikers and campers in extreme cold conditions use similar shift systems to maintain warming fires and monitor for dangers. Arctic explorers and research teams employ watch rotations that would be immediately recognizable to Viking families, proving that some survival strategies are truly timeless. For modern preppers and survivalists, understanding the principles behind the Viking watch system provides valuable insights into group survival dynamics and resource management. The ability to organize and maintain a reliable watch system could be crucial in long-term emergency situations where group cooperation is essential for survival. The Vikings demonstrated that survival often depends not just on individual skills and resources, but on the ability to work together effectively under extreme stress. The watch system also illustrates the Vikings' understanding of human psychology and group dynamics. They recognized that shared responsibility created stronger bonds between family members, and that giving everyone a role in survival efforts maintained morale and prevented the resentment that could develop if survival duties were unequally distributed. This wisdom about human nature under stress remains relevant for anyone facing challenging survival situations. 6. The underground pantry. Root cellars and cache systems. The earth beneath the Viking settlements held more than just the promise of spring crops. It contained the key to surviving months of brutal winter, when no fresh food could be gathered. The Vikings developed sophisticated underground storage systems that took advantage of the Earth's natural temperature regulation, creating preservation environments that could keep food fresh for months without any external energy input. These weren't simple holes in the ground. They were carefully engineered storage systems that represented some of the most advanced food preservation technology of the medieval period. The concept of underground storage was based on the Vikings' deep understanding of how Earth temperature changes with depth and season. They knew that while surface temperatures could fluctuate wildly, from summer heat to winter cold that could kill, the temperature several feet underground remained relatively stable year-round. This stable temperature zone, typically between 45 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on the location, provided ideal conditions for long-term food storage. Construction of a Viking root cellar began with careful site selection. The location had to be well drained to prevent flooding, easily accessible from the main dwelling even in deep snow, and positioned to take advantage of natural thermal characteristics of the landscape. Many Viking storage cellars were built into hillsides or slopes, using the natural insulation of the earth while ensuring good drainage and access. The excavation process itself was a major undertaking that required skilled understanding of soil types, drainage patterns, and structural integrity. The Vikings dug chambers that were typically 6 to 8 feet deep, large enough to hold substantial quantities of food, but not so large that they became unstable or difficult to maintain. The walls were often lined with stones or timber to prevent collapse and provide additional thermal mass. Ventilation was a crucial aspect of Viking underground storage that demonstrated their sophisticated understanding of food preservation science. They created carefully designed air circulation systems that prevented the buildup of moisture and gases that could cause spoilage, while maintaining the stable temperatures that made underground storage effective. These ventilation systems often included multiple air shafts, positioned to create natural air circulation patterns. The Vikings developed specialized storage containers and methods specifically designed for underground use. Different foods required different storage approaches, and they created a variety of containers, wrappings, and preservation techniques optimized for the underground environment. Grains were stored in waterproof containers that protected them from moisture and pests. Root vegetables were buried in sand or sawdust that regulated humidity while preventing freezing. Preserved meats were wrapped in materials that allowed air circulation while protecting them from contamination. Temperature monitoring was another area where Viking ingenuity showed. They developed simple but effective methods for monitoring the temperature in their storage areas, using natural indicators and materials that would show when conditions were becoming too warm or too cold for safe food storage. Some families used water containers as primitive thermometers, knowing that if the water began to freeze, the storage area was getting too cold for certain types of food. The Vikings also created sophisticated inventory management systems for their underground storage. They developed methods for organizing and tracking their stored food supplies, ensuring that older items were used first and that the storage areas remained organized and accessible, even during the darkest winter months. This wasn't just about convenience. It was about survival, as wasted food could mean the difference between life and death during a harsh winter. Multiple storage sites were often used to spread risk and ensure that no single catastrophe could destroy all of a family's food reserves. Vikings might maintain several smaller storage areas rather than one large one, distributing their food supplies across different locations. This strategy protected against various disasters: flooding, collapse, pest infestation, or discovery by raiders that could compromise their survival stores. The cache system extended beyond just root cellars to include hidden storage sites located away from the main settlement. These remote caches served as emergency backup supplies and were often used to store the most valuable and essential items. The locations of these caches were carefully memorized and sometimes passed down through generations as family survival knowledge. Security was another important consideration in Viking storage systems. They developed methods for concealing and protecting their food stores from both human and animal threats. Storage entrances were often disguised or hidden, and the Vikings created various deterrents and barriers to prevent unauthorized access to their precious food supplies. The Vikings also understood the importance of storage area maintenance and developed regular inspection and maintenance schedules for their underground storage systems. They knew that small problems could quickly become major disasters if not addressed promptly, and they created systematic approaches to monitoring and maintaining their storage facilities throughout the year. Different regions developed variations in underground storage techniques based on local conditions and available materials. Coastal Viking settlements might emphasize storage methods that dealt with high humidity and salt air, while inland communities focused on techniques that worked well in drier conditions. These regional variations show how the Vikings adapted their basic storage principles to work effectively in different environments. The construction and maintenance of underground storage systems also served as important community activities that strengthened social bonds and shared survival knowledge. Families would often cooperate in building and maintaining storage facilities, sharing labor, materials, and expertise. This cooperation ensured that the most effective techniques were spread throughout the community, and that everyone benefited from collective survival wisdom. Modern homesteaders and off-grid enthusiasts have rediscovered many of these Viking storage techniques, adapting them for contemporary use. Root cellars built using Viking principles remain some of the most effective methods for storing food without refrigeration, proving that these ancient techniques are still relevant and effective today. For contemporary survivalists and preppers, understanding Viking underground storage systems provides valuable knowledge about long-term food preservation without dependence on modern technology. The ability to create effective underground storage could be crucial in extended emergency situations where conventional food preservation methods are not available. The Viking underground storage systems demonstrate their remarkable understanding of physics, biology, and engineering principles that weren't formally documented until centuries later. They intuitively grasped concepts like thermal mass, humidity control, and air circulation that form the basis of modern food preservation technology. Their methods were proven effective through centuries of successful use, feeding families and communities through countless harsh winters, when failure meant death. 7. The buddy system. Shared body heat strategies. In the life or death struggle against winter's killing cold, the Vikings discovered that human bodies were not just individual heating units. They were components of a larger thermal system that could be optimized through cooperation and strategic positioning. The concept of shared body heat might seem obvious today, but the Vikings developed this basic principle into sophisticated survival strategies that could mean the difference between waking up on a cold morning and never waking up at all. The foundation of Viking shared heating was the understanding that the human body generates a significant amount of heat, approximately 100 watts at rest, similar to a bright light bulb. However, this heat is quickly lost to the environment through radiation, convection, and conduction unless it can be trapped and concentrated. The Vikings developed techniques for capturing and sharing this precious thermal energy that went far beyond simply huddling together for warmth. The sleeping arrangement in Viking longhouses was carefully planned to maximize heat sharing, while maintaining practical considerations like privacy, hierarchy, and access to resources. Families would create sleeping areas where multiple people could share warmth while still maintaining the social structures that were important to their culture. These arrangements weren't random. They were strategic decisions based on understanding how body heat could be most effectively shared and conserved. The Vikings understood that different people generate different amounts of body heat, and they used this knowledge to optimize their sleeping arrangements. Adults typically generated more heat than children, so they would position themselves to share that heat with the most vulnerable family members. Elderly individuals and small children were often placed in the warmest positions, surrounded by adults who could provide additional thermal protection. The concept of thermal layering extended beyond clothing to sleeping arrangements. Vikings would create sleeping systems that combined individual bedding with shared heating elements. Multiple family members would sleep under large fur blankets or woolen covers that trapped the combined body heat of the group. These shared sleeping systems were far more effective than individual bedding arrangements, as they created larger pockets of warm air that were less likely to be disrupted by movement or air currents. Strategic positioning was crucial for effective heat sharing. The Vikings learned to arrange sleeping bodies to maximize heat transfer while minimizing heat loss. They would position themselves to share heat across the largest possible surface area, often sleeping in configurations that would seem intimate by modern standards, but were purely practical survival strategies. The goal was to create a combined thermal mass that could maintain warmth throughout the night. The Vikings also developed techniques for sharing heat during waking hours, particularly during the coldest parts of winter, when indoor temperatures could drop to dangerous levels. They would engage in group activities that required people to work closely together, sharing body heat while accomplishing necessary tasks. Food preparation, craft work, and equipment maintenance were often done in groups, partly for the thermal benefits of having multiple people working in close proximity. Breathing techniques were another aspect of shared heating that the Vikings mastered. They understood that warm exhaled air could be used to provide additional heat, and they developed methods for directing and sharing this warm air. Family members would sometimes sleep positioned to share warm breath, and they created sleeping arrangements that would capture and circulate exhaled air within the shared sleeping space. The construction of shared sleeping areas was carefully planned to maximize heat retention. Vikings would create sleeping spaces that were enclosed or partially enclosed, using hanging furs or fabric partitions to create smaller spaces within the larger longhouse. These sleeping chambers trapped warm air and prevented it from being lost to the larger, colder volume of the house. The smaller the space, the more effectively body heat could warm the environment. Timing was also important in Viking heat-sharing strategies. They would coordinate their sleep and wake cycles to ensure that warm bodies were always present in the shared sleeping area. If one person had to get up during the night, others would adjust their positions to maintain the thermal integrity of the group. This coordination required communication and cooperation that strengthened family bonds while serving practical survival purposes. The Vikings developed special techniques for warming cold family members who might be suffering from exposure or hypothermia. They understood that direct skin-to-skin contact was the most effective way to transfer body heat to someone who was dangerously cold. This wasn't just about hugging someone to warm them up. It was a sophisticated understanding of heat transfer that could save lives in emergency situations. Clothing played a crucial role in shared heating strategies. Vikings would sometimes share clothing items, particularly outer garments like cloaks and blankets, that could cover multiple people simultaneously. These shared garments were designed to be large enough to provide coverage for several people while still being manageable and practical. The sharing of clothing also meant that families could pool their resources to create more effective thermal protection than any individual could achieve alone. The Vikings also understood the importance of preparation for shared heating. They would warm sleeping areas before occupying them, using heated stones or other warming devices to preheat the spaces where they would sleep. This preparation meant that when they entered their shared sleeping arrangements, they were adding their body heat to an already warm environment rather than trying to heat a cold space from nothing. Age and health considerations were important factors in Viking heat-sharing strategies. Pregnant women, nursing mothers, and sick family members received priority positioning in the warmest spots within shared sleeping arrangements. The Vikings understood that these individuals had special thermal needs and that their survival was often crucial to the survival of the entire family unit. The psychological benefits of shared heating were as important as the physical ones. The comfort and security provided by close physical contact with family members helped reduce anxiety and stress, which in turn helped conserve energy and maintain the positive mental attitude that was essential for winter survival. The shared heating arrangements reinforced family bonds and created a sense of unity that was crucial for getting through the difficult winter months. Modern applications of Viking heat-sharing techniques can be found in contemporary survival training, military operations, and emergency response protocols. Rescue teams use similar techniques to treat hypothermia victims, and survival instructors teach heat-sharing methods that are directly descended from Viking practices. These ancient techniques remain some of the most effective methods for treating cold exposure and preventing hypothermia in emergency situations. For modern preppers and survivalists, understanding Viking heat-sharing strategies provides valuable knowledge about group survival techniques that don't require any special equipment or technology. The ability to effectively share body heat could be crucial in power outage situations, emergency shelter scenarios, or any situation where conventional heating is not available. The Vikings' sophisticated understanding of shared heating demonstrates their practical knowledge of human physiology and thermodynamics. They understood concepts like thermal mass, heat transfer, and energy conservation that form the basis of modern heating and cooling technology. Their techniques were developed through generations of trial and error, refined through necessity, and proven effective through centuries of successful use in some of the world's harshest environments. 8. The alcohol solution. Fermented beverages as internal heating. The Vikings understood that surviving brutal winters required more than just external warmth. They needed to generate heat from within their own bodies. Their solution was both ingenious and enjoyable. They developed sophisticated fermentation techniques that produced alcoholic beverages, specifically designed to provide internal heating during the coldest months. This wasn't just about getting drunk. It was about creating liquid fuel that could help maintain core body temperature when other heating methods weren't sufficient. The science behind using alcohol for internal heating is more complex than it might appear. While alcohol does create a sensation of warmth by dilating blood vessels and increasing blood flow to the skin, the Vikings understood that the real benefit came from the calories that alcohol provided. Each gram of alcohol contains about 7 calories, making it a dense source of energy that could be quickly converted to heat by the body's metabolic processes. Viking mead was perhaps their most famous fermented beverage, but it was far from their only option. They created a variety of fermented drinks using whatever ingredients were available in their harsh northern environment. Honey was the primary ingredient for mead, but they also fermented various grains, fruits, and even tree saps to create alcoholic beverages that could provide internal heating during the winter months. The fermentation process itself was a carefully controlled operation that required skill and knowledge passed down through generations. Vikings had to understand how temperature, time, and ingredients affected the fermentation process, and they developed techniques for creating consistent, reliable results even under challenging conditions. The fermentation process also had the benefit of preserving the sugars and nutrients in the base ingredients, making them available for consumption months after the original harvest. Different types of fermented beverages were created for different purposes and occasions. Some were designed for daily consumption and had relatively low alcohol content, providing calories and warmth without causing intoxication that could be dangerous in survival situations. Others were higher in alcohol content and were reserved for special occasions or emergency situations when maximum internal heating was needed. The Vikings also understood the importance of timing when consuming alcohol for heating purposes. They knew that alcohol consumption needed to be balanced with food intake to prevent the negative effects of drinking on an empty stomach. They developed eating and drinking patterns that maximized the heating benefits of alcohol while minimizing the risks associated with consumption in cold environments. Storage and preservation of fermented beverages was another area where Viking expertise showed. They created storage systems that kept their alcoholic beverages from freezing while maintaining their potency and flavor. These storage techniques often involved underground caching systems similar to those used for food, but with special considerations for the unique requirements of liquid storage in freezing conditions. The Vikings also developed methods for warming their fermented beverages before consumption, understanding that hot drinks provided more immediate heating benefits than cold ones. They created various heating techniques that could warm mead, ale, or other fermented drinks without destroying the alcohol content or compromising the flavor. Heated alcoholic beverages became an important part of their cold-weather survival arsenal. Quality control was crucial in Viking fermentation operations. They developed methods for testing and ensuring the safety of their fermented beverages, understanding that contaminated or improperly fermented drinks could cause illness that would be potentially fatal during winter months when medical resources were limited. Their fermentation techniques included natural preservation methods that prevented harmful bacterial growth while encouraging beneficial fermentation. The social aspects of fermented beverage consumption were also important for winter survival. Sharing drinks was a community activity that brought families and groups together during the long, dark winter months. This social interaction helped maintain morale and mental health, which were crucial factors in surviving extended periods of isolation and harsh conditions. Vikings also used fermented beverages for medicinal purposes, understanding that alcohol could help treat various ailments and injuries. They created herbal meads and other fermented preparations that combined the heating benefits of alcohol with the therapeutic properties of various plants and herbs. These medicinal drinks served dual purposes as both internal heating sources and treatments for common winter ailments. The Vikings developed specialized drinking vessels and serving methods that maximized the heating benefits of their fermented beverages. They created drinking horns, cups, and other containers that could hold warm drinks and transfer heat to the hands while drinking. These vessels were often shared among family members, creating additional opportunities for heat sharing and social bonding. Production scheduling was another important aspect of Viking fermentation operations. They planned their brewing and fermentation activities to ensure that alcoholic beverages would be ready when they were most needed during the winter months. This required understanding the timing of fermentation processes and coordinating them with seasonal availability of ingredients. The Vikings also created concentrated alcoholic preparations that could be stored in small containers and consumed in small quantities when maximum heating effect was needed. These concentrated drinks were essentially liquid emergency rations that could provide quick energy and internal warming in crisis situations. Modern applications of Viking fermentation techniques can be found in contemporary craft brewing, distilling, and fermentation practices. Many modern brewers and distillers use techniques that are directly descended from Viking methods, and the principles of using fermented beverages for internal heating remain relevant for modern survival situations. For contemporary preppers and survivalists, understanding Viking fermentation techniques provides valuable knowledge about creating emergency heating and energy sources using basic ingredients and equipment. The ability to produce alcoholic beverages for internal heating could be important in long-term survival situations where conventional heating methods are not available. The Vikings' mastery of fermentation demonstrates their sophisticated understanding of biochemistry, microbiology, and human physiology. They understood concepts like fermentation science, alcohol metabolism, and thermal regulation that weren't formally documented until centuries later. Their techniques were developed through generations of experimentation and refinement, proven effective through centuries of successful use in some of the world's most challenging environments. 9. The smoke screen. Strategic smoke for warmth and signaling. The Vikings turned one of fire's most annoying byproducts into a powerful survival tool, where most people saw smoke as something to be eliminated or avoided. Viking survival experts recognized it as a valuable resource that could provide warmth, communication, and even protection. Their sophisticated understanding of smoke management transformed what could have been a dangerous indoor air pollution problem into a strategic advantage that helped them survive the brutal northern winters. The basic principle behind using smoke for additional heating was the recognition that smoke contains significant thermal energy that is typically lost when it escapes through chimneys or ventilation systems. The Vikings developed techniques for capturing and utilizing this thermal energy before allowing the smoke to exit their dwellings. This wasn't just about tolerating smoky conditions. It was about engineering smoke flow to maximize heat extraction while maintaining breathable air quality. Viking longhouses were designed with sophisticated smoke management systems that directed smoke flow through the living space in patterns that provided maximum heating benefit. The smoke would travel through channels and pathways that allowed it to transfer heat to the air and surfaces throughout the dwelling before finally exiting through roof vents or openings. This system extracted much more heat from each fire than simple direct heating could provide. The construction of these smoke management systems required detailed understanding of airflow dynamics, pressure differentials, and thermal properties of different materials. Vikings learned to create smoke channels using stones, clay, and other materials that would absorb heat from the passing smoke and continue radiating that heat into the living space long after the smoke had passed. These thermal mass elements turned the smoke management system into an extension of the heated stone hearth concept. Different types of fuel produced different types of smoke with varying heating properties, and the Vikings developed expertise in selecting and combining fuels to optimize smoke production for heating purposes. Some woods and organic materials produced dense, hot smoke that provided excellent heating, while others created lighter smoke that was easier to manage but provided less thermal benefit. The Vikings learned to match their fuel choices to their heating needs and environmental conditions. Smoke timing was another crucial aspect of Viking smoke management. They understood that smoke production needed to be coordinated with daily activities and sleep cycles to maximize heating benefits while minimizing health risks. During active periods when people were awake and moving around, they might tolerate higher smoke levels for maximum heating. During sleep periods, they would adjust fire management to reduce smoke production while maintaining heat output. The Vikings also developed techniques for using smoke as a signaling method, creating communication systems that could operate over long distances even in harsh winter conditions. They learned to create different types of smoke signals using various materials and techniques, allowing them to communicate information about weather conditions, emergencies, and other important matters across the landscape. Smoke preservation was another area where Viking ingenuity showed. They developed methods for using smoke to preserve food and other organic materials, understanding that the chemical components of smoke had natural preservative properties. This preservation technique served dual purposes. It extended the useful life of food stores while utilizing smoke that was already being produced for heating purposes. The Vikings created specialized tools and equipment for managing smoke flow and quality within their dwellings. They developed adjustable vents, smoke deflectors, and other devices that allowed them to control smoke distribution and concentration. These tools enabled them to fine-tune their smoke management systems based on changing conditions and requirements. Health considerations were important in Viking smoke management strategies. They understood that while smoke could provide valuable heating, excessive smoke exposure could cause health problems that would compromise survival. They developed techniques for maintaining breathable air quality while still capturing the thermal benefits of smoke, creating living environments that were smoky, but not dangerously so. The Vikings also learned to use smoke for pest control, understanding that certain types of smoke could repel insects and other pests that might threaten food stores or cause health problems. This pest control application of smoke management provided additional survival benefits beyond just heating and communication. Seasonal variations in smoke management were another area of Viking expertise. They understood that different weather conditions required different approaches to smoke management, and they developed techniques for adapting their systems to work effectively in various environmental conditions. Winter smoke management was different from summer approaches, and they learned to adjust their methods accordingly. The Vikings developed techniques for creating smokeless fires when stealth was important, understanding that smoke could reveal their location to enemies or predators. They learned to select fuels and manage fires in ways that minimize smoke production while maintaining heat output, providing tactical advantages in dangerous situations. Smoke quality assessment was another skill that Vikings developed, learning to evaluate smoke for various purposes and applications. They could determine from the color, density, and smell of smoke whether it was suitable for heating, signaling, preservation, or other uses. This assessment ability allowed them to optimize their smoke management for specific purposes. Modern applications of Viking smoke management techniques can be found in contemporary wood heating systems, outdoor cooking methods, and emergency signaling practices. Many modern wood stoves and heating systems use principles that are directly descended from Viking smoke management techniques, proving that these ancient methods remain relevant and effective. For modern preppers and survivalists, understanding Viking smoke management provides valuable knowledge about extracting maximum heating benefit from limited fuel resources. The ability to effectively manage smoke for heating, signaling, and preservation could be crucial in emergency situations where conventional heating and communication methods are not available. The Vikings' mastery of smoke management demonstrates their sophisticated understanding of combustion science, fluid dynamics, and thermal engineering. They understood concepts like heat transfer, airflow patterns, and combustion chemistry that weren't formally documented until centuries later. Their techniques were developed through generations of observation and experimentation, refined through necessity, and proven effective through centuries of successful use. 10. The emergency shelter. Quick-build survival structures. When Viking travelers, hunters, or raiders found themselves caught in sudden winter storms far from the safety of their longhouses, they had to rely on their knowledge of emergency shelter construction to survive. These weren't planned construction projects. They were desperate races against time and weather that required the ability to create life-saving protection, using only materials that could be gathered quickly from the immediate environment. The Vikings developed a repertoire of emergency shelter techniques that could be deployed rapidly in various environmental conditions. These shelters weren't intended for long-term habitation, but they were designed to provide enough protection to keep a person alive through a dangerous weather event. The key was understanding how to maximize protection while minimizing construction time and material requirements. The foundation of Viking emergency shelter construction was the understanding that any protection was better than no protection, and that even crude shelters could provide life-saving benefits if they were properly designed and constructed. The Vikings learned to assess available materials quickly and choose shelter designs that could be built effectively with whatever resources were at hand. Snow was one of the most important emergency shelter materials in the Viking environment, and they developed sophisticated techniques for using snow as both insulation and structural material. They understood that snow could be cut, shaped, and stacked to create walls and barriers that would block wind and trap warm air. The Vikings learned to work with different types of snow, understanding how wet snow, dry snow, and wind-packed snow could be used for different construction purposes. The quingy was one of the most effective emergency shelters in the Viking arsenal. This technique involved piling snow into a large mound, allowing it to settle and harden, then hollowing out the interior to create a snow cave. The Vikings understood that the process of settling and hardening created a snow structure that was much stronger than loose snow, and they developed techniques for controlling this process to create reliable emergency shelters. Wind protection was the primary consideration in Viking emergency shelter design. They understood that wind chill was often the most dangerous factor in cold weather survival, and they designed their emergency shelters to provide maximum protection from wind exposure. This often meant building shelters that were low to the ground and oriented to use natural terrain features for additional wind protection. The Vikings also developed techniques for creating emergency shelters, using natural materials like branches, bark, and other forest resources. They learned to identify and utilize materials that were readily available in their northern environment, creating shelters that could be built quickly using basic tools or even just bare hands. These natural material shelters were often combined with snow construction to create hybrid structures that provided excellent protection. Insulation was another crucial aspect of Viking emergency shelter construction. They understood that ground insulation was particularly important, as the ground could conduct heat away from the body very quickly. They developed techniques for creating insulating barriers between their bodies and the ground using materials like pine boughs, dried grass, or even their own clothing arranged strategically. The Vikings learned to assess emergency shelter locations quickly and effectively, understanding that site selection was often more important than construction technique. They looked for natural features that could provide protection from wind, drainage to prevent flooding, and access to materials needed for construction. The ability to quickly identify good shelter locations was a skill that could save precious time in emergency situations. Ventilation was an important consideration, even in emergency shelters, as the Vikings understood that poor air quality could be dangerous in enclosed spaces. They developed techniques for creating ventilation openings that provided fresh air without compromising the thermal protection of the shelter. This was particularly important in snow shelters where carbon dioxide buildup could be a serious hazard. The Vikings also developed techniques for heating emergency shelters, understanding that even small amounts of heat could make the difference between survival and death. They created methods for building safe fires inside or near emergency shelters, using reflector systems and heat channeling techniques to maximize heating efficiency while minimizing fire hazards. Tool requirements for emergency shelter construction were kept to a minimum, as the Vikings understood that emergency situations often occurred when people were traveling light or had lost their equipment. They developed construction techniques that could be accomplished with basic tools like knives, axes, or even improvised implements created from available materials. Time management was crucial in emergency shelter construction, as the Vikings understood that hypothermia and exposure could become fatal very quickly in severe weather conditions. They developed construction sequences that prioritized the most critical protection elements first, ensuring that basic wind and weather protection was established before working on comfort improvements. The Vikings also created techniques for improving emergency shelters over time, understanding that weather events might last longer than originally expected. They developed methods for reinforcing and upgrading quick-build shelters without having to completely rebuild them, allowing them to improve their protection as time and materials permitted. Group shelter construction was another area of Viking expertise, as they understood that emergency situations often involved multiple people who needed protection. They developed techniques for creating emergency shelters that could protect several people while still being constructible quickly enough to be practical in emergency situations. Camouflage and concealment were sometimes important factors in Viking emergency shelter construction, particularly during times of conflict or when traveling through dangerous territory. They developed techniques for creating shelters that blended with the natural environment and were difficult to detect from a distance, providing protection from both weather and human threats. Modern applications of Viking emergency shelter techniques can be found in contemporary survival training, military operations, and outdoor recreation. Many modern survival instructors teach shelter construction methods that are directly descended from Viking techniques, and these ancient methods remain some of the most effective emergency shelter strategies available for modern preppers and survivalists. Understanding Viking emergency shelter construction provides valuable knowledge about creating protection in crisis situations, using minimal tools and materials. The ability to build effective emergency shelters could be crucial in natural disaster situations, power outage scenarios, or any situation where conventional shelter is not available. The Vikings' mastery of emergency shelter construction demonstrates their practical understanding of structural engineering, thermodynamics, and material science. They understood concepts like load distribution, thermal insulation, and structural integrity that form the basis of modern construction technology. Their techniques were developed through real-world testing in life-or-death situations, refined through generations of use, and proven effective through centuries of successful application in emergency situations. Conclusion: the enduring legacy of Viking survival. Wisdom. As we reach the end of our journey through the harsh landscape of Viking winter survival, one truth becomes unmistakably clear. These ancient people possessed a depth of practical knowledge that modern civilization has largely forgotten. Their survival techniques weren't just clever adaptations to harsh conditions. They were sophisticated solutions to fundamental human challenges that remain relevant today. The Vikings faced a world where failure meant death, where there were no safety nets, no emergency services, and no backup systems. Every technique they developed had to work reliably. Every strategy had to be proven through real-world testing, and every innovation had to contribute to survival in measurable ways. This crucible of necessity created a body of knowledge that was both practical and profound, tested by centuries of successful application in some of the world's most challenging environments. What makes Viking survival wisdom so valuable today is not just its effectiveness, but its accessibility. These techniques don't require expensive equipment, complex technology, or specialized training. They are based on fundamental principles of physics, biology, and human behavior that are as true today as they were 1,000 years ago. The materials and methods the Vikings used are still available, still effective, and still relevant for anyone who wants to understand how to survive without dependence on modern systems. The 10 survival strategies we've explored represent different approaches to the same fundamental challenge: how to maintain human life in hostile conditions, using only the resources that are readily available. From the earth-sheltered longhouses that provided protection from the elements to the sophisticated fermentation techniques that created internal heating, each method demonstrates the Vikings' ability to find innovative solutions to survival challenges. Perhaps most importantly, Viking survival wisdom teaches us about the power of human ingenuity and cooperation. These weren't superhuman people with special abilities. They were ordinary humans who faced extraordinary challenges and found ways to overcome them. Their success came from careful observation, systematic experimentation, and the willingness to learn from both success and failure. They understood that survival often depended more on knowledge and preparation than on strength or luck. The psychological aspects of Viking survival are as important as the physical techniques. These people understood that survival was as much a mental challenge as a physical one, and they developed strategies for maintaining morale, motivation, and mental health during extended periods of hardship. Their emphasis on community cooperation, shared responsibility, and mutual support created social systems that were as essential to survival as their physical technologies. For modern preppers, survivalists, and anyone interested in emergency preparedness, Viking survival techniques offer proven alternatives to high-tech solutions in situations where modern systems fail, where power is unavailable, or where supply chains are disrupted. The ability to apply ancient survival wisdom could be invaluable. These techniques work without electricity, without manufactured materials, and without complex equipment, making them ideal backup strategies for modern emergency preparedness. The environmental lessons from Viking survival are also increasingly relevant as we face modern challenges related to climate change, resource scarcity, and environmental degradation. The Vikings demonstrated that humans can live comfortably and sustainably, even in harsh environments, using renewable resources and working with natural systems rather than against them. Their techniques for thermal efficiency, resource conservation, and environmental adaptation offer insights that could inform modern approaches to sustainable living. The Vikings also teach us about the importance of traditional knowledge and the value of learning from previous generations. In our modern rush toward technological solutions, we sometimes forget that our ancestors developed highly effective methods for dealing with challenges that we still face today. The preservation and application of traditional knowledge represents a valuable resource that shouldn't be lost in our pursuit of modern convenience. Looking forward, the principles behind Viking survival techniques continue to inspire innovations in modern technology and design. Contemporary architects are rediscovering earth-sheltered construction. Modern textile designers are exploring the thermal properties of natural fibers, and modern food preservation techniques are incorporating ancient fermentation and storage methods. The Vikings' legacy lives on in these modern applications of ancient wisdom. The study of Viking survival techniques also provides valuable insights into human adaptability and resilience. These people faced challenges that would seem insurmountable to most modern individuals. Yet they not only survived, but created rich, complex societies that lasted for centuries. Their example demonstrates that humans are capable of incredible adaptation and innovation when necessity demands it. Perhaps most importantly, Viking survival wisdom reminds us that true security comes not from dependence on external systems, but from knowledge, skills, and the ability to work with available resources. In an uncertain world where modern systems can fail, where supply chains can be disrupted, and where emergencies can occur without warning, the ability to apply fundamental survival principles could be more valuable than any amount of stored supplies or high-tech equipment. The Vikings survived and thrived for centuries in one of the world's most challenging environments using nothing but human ingenuity, natural resources, and the wisdom of generations. Their techniques worked then, they work now, and they will continue to work as long as humans face the fundamental challenges of staying warm, fed, and safe in a sometimes hostile world. As we face our own uncertain future, the Vikings offer us something more valuable than any modern technology. They offer us proof that humans can overcome incredible challenges through knowledge, cooperation, and determination. Their survival techniques are not just historical curiosities. They are practical tools for modern survival, proven effective through centuries of use, and available to anyone willing to learn from the wisdom of the past. The harsh winds that howled around Viking longhouses 1,000 years ago still blow today, and the cold that threatened their ancestors still threatens us when modern systems fail. But armed with their knowledge and inspired by their example, we can face these challenges with confidence, knowing that humans have not only survived but thrived in conditions far more challenging than anything we're likely to encounter. The Vikings left us more than just stories of raids and exploration. They left us a comprehensive guide to human survival that remains as relevant today as it was when the first Norse settlers looked out at the frozen landscape of Iceland and decided to call it home. Their legacy is not just one of conquest and adventure, but of practical wisdom that can help us navigate our own challenging times with skill, knowledge, and the unshakable confidence that comes from understanding how to survive and thrive no matter what the world throws at us.